Western military sources say a campaign by Ukraine is gathering pace to retake the Russian-controlled city of Kherson. A key bridge into the city has been hit by Ukrainian forces. The city was the first in the war to fall to Moscow's troops. UK defence officials say Kherson is now virtually cut off from other occupied territories. Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams is in the capital, Kyiv, and has more now on the strategic significance for Ukraine.
Well, it does mark potentially the beginning of a significant reversal of fortunes for Ukraine. As you say, Kherson was the first city of any consequence to fall right at the beginning of the campaign. And it is also a place where the Russians have talked about conducting a referendum among the local population about joining Russia. Obviously a referendum that would be conducted really in pretty sham conditions. So for political and strategic reasons, it is an objective for the Ukrainian military. It is a place where the Ukrainians feel that they can begin to roll back Russian advances. Because of the way Kherson is located on the north side of the Dnipro River, connected to other parts of Russian-controlled territory by these key bridges, the Ukrainians feel that by destroying those bridges or damaging them beyond operation, they can isolate those Russian troops on that side of the river and ultimately retake the city. I say ultimately, this could take quite a long time. The Ukrainians are certainly showing the ability to cause damage to Russian logistics and supply routes and ammunition depots using their newly acquired Western equipment. What they haven't yet shown their ability to do is to retake significant areas of ground, and that would be the next stage of this.
And if this proves as much of a turning point as it seems at this stage, do you think that we might see a shift in military tactics or an approach to negotiations as a result of this?
Well, let's put negotiations on hold just for a moment, because I think it's going to take a lot more than that to force a kind of negotiated settlement. But a change of tactics? Well, maybe. I mean, at the moment we are seeing the Russians apparently reinforcing, sending troops from the eastern Donbass region across to the Kherson area in an attempt to forestall any kind of Ukrainian advance. So it is having an effect. In the Donbass, meanwhile, Western officials believe that the Russian campaign there, which has been grinding forward for the last several months, has really reached a point at which it's not really progressing at all. But, you know, at times like this, Russia has the ability to remind everyone in Ukraine that nowhere is safe. This morning we had air raid sirens. If I look up to the north, I can just see a little bit of smoke still rising from a target. I'm not quite sure what it was that was hit early this morning. So every now and again you get these reminders from Russia that nowhere in Ukraine is safe.
Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams speaking to me earlier. Well, I'm joined now by Ed Arnold, who's a research fellow in European security at the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you so much for joining us, Ed. First of all, what do you think the key factors have been behind this turning point?
Well, the key factor has really been the supply from the West of longer range rocket systems to Ukraine, which are more accurate. They have a range overmatch on Russian systems, and they're also able to maneuver, so they are more difficult to target by Russian artillery. And really what we're seeing is that the Ukrainians are starting to set the conditions for a large-scale counter-offensive around Kherson. Politically, that's important because Ukraine needs to show the West that it is able to use these systems and take back significant territory. And then militarily, taking back Kherson will mean that Odessa has some strategic depths. But it also means that the Russians don't have a foothold north of the Dnipro River, which means that they're pushed further to the east, which actually, from a defensive position, puts Ukraine in a much better place.
Of course, it's early days, but how far do you think that the momentum of this might continue and we might see similar developments like this in other cities?
Well, I think for now, the Ukrainians have to focus on Kherson. They've been fighting for a long time. Their troops in the east are very tired. They've been fighting very high intensity. So actually, Ukraine, although it has these new systems in terms of its infantry potential, it doesn't have a lot of experienced troops that are fresh to be able to take back this territory. And what we're seeing from the Ukrainians, they have to fight differently from the Russians. They can't just use a hammer to destroy population centres. These are Ukrainian cities, so they need to be very careful about how they go about it. And the strikes on the Antonivsky Bridge is exactly that. It's forcing the Russians to manoeuvre in certain ways, and it's also cutting off potential reinforcement or withdrawal routes for the Russians. So they're being very focused around how they're going to take back the cities, and it'll be a model for what they might then have to replicate in the east further down the line.
Now, I want to ask you about a comment, Ed. This is from the National Security Advisor, who made a speech, who said that the West risks entering a nuclear war because it's not talking enough to Russia and China. What do you make of that?
Yes, so Stephen, the National Security Advisor, was giving a threat update, and essentially what his main point was that there is a risk of nuclear escalation and potentially war because the West collectively is not speaking to both Russia and China. In terms of Russia, through the Cold War, there were multiple opportunities of dialogue through treaties and arms control agreements to understand intent, doctrine and capabilities. But Russia's repeated violations of these have basically made those structures and systems for dialogue completely moribund. So it's very difficult to actually understand what Russia is trying to achieve. And then on China, China is growing its nuclear arsenal and has shown a complete disdain for arms control. So more effort is needed there for increased dialogue with China to try and understand what that means for the Indo-Pacific region.
Ed, thank you for your time. That's Ed Arnold from the Royal United Services Institute.